Hi, I'm Amy and welcome to my channel. This channel is all about merging spirituality and psychology so you can manifest your dream relationships. And in today's video, I did ask a couple of weeks ago for questions because I have interviewed my partner and I wanted to give people a little bit of relief really, because when you are on this journey, you have this desire to manifest somebody specific and it's taken a long time and you're not really seeing any feedback, it becomes really disheartening and it can be really frustrating when you can't see the results of your hard work. So I thought that I would ask my partner any questions that you wanted to ask. There were a lot over on YouTube and on Reddit as well, some of which were the same, so I've just sort of amalgamated them so it was just for ease, so you weren't watching a super long video. So just as a preface to this video, it does not matter what your person is thinking right now. It doesn't matter because things are malleable, they can always change. And as I say, the purpose of this video is to give you some relief so that you can not have such a hard time believing that your hard work is actually working. And in between these questions, I'll give you a bit of a insight as to where I was at that time as well, so that you can see the whole picture really of what I was doing and what he was doing and thinking, and how it all sort of came to be where, you know, several years later, we now live together. We have a really healthy, strong, resilient relationship. So let's get into it. I have got my notepad, so I will be looking down in this video. So question one was, what kept him away? So I asked him because, you know, if you're a follower of this channel, you will know that we had many breakups, some of which lasted quite a few weeks. So I've sort of honed in on the ones that lasted quite a few weeks, not the ones that were sort of like a day or two or, you know, sort of a week. And he said that he just wanted peace. He was tired of the tension, he needed to decompress, and he couldn't handle the chaos anymore. Now, me at the time, if I'd have heard that, that would have triggered me to high heaven. How dare he say that our relationship was chaotic? But the reality was that it was. We had opposing attachment styles. We were playing two different games with two different sets of rules, and neither of us knew it. So the relationship was chaotic. I had a really hard time processing emotions and actually being more resilient to what was happening. I was heavily sensitive to criticism, and we both were, but because our attachment styles were the complete opposite, I would pull because I wanted closeness. I was afraid of being left, and he would push away because he was afraid of his freedom being taken. He was afraid of being engulfed by the relationship. And I just didn't see that at the time. So what he said is, for the at least first few weeks, he did actually feel a really big sense of relief. He did need to decompress. And as an avoidant attachment style, he needed longer to decompress than I did, which meant that, you know, I decompressed within a day or two. He needed weeks, which is really frustrating when you're on the other side of it. But when you can understand that, you know, if it is that your partner is an avoidant attached person, they do need their time to decompress. And I'm not saying that stonewalling or ignoring somebody is the right thing to do. It never is. And a conversation definitely needs to happen about that. But they do need to decompress before you can even have that conversation. So question two is, were they only thinking of themselves? And his response to this was, at first, yes, he was solely thinking of himself. He was solely thinking about meeting his own needs, making himself feel better, getting into creature comforts. But then did say that after a few days, he would then start to think about me. He would then start to feel guilty because I was hurt. He would want to reach out but couldn't because he was worried about what the reaction was going to be. He was in fact afraid of me rejecting him. So the first few days would be the relief phase, and then following that, the feelings would then come up again. He's even said to me that he would watch his WhatsApp to see when I was online, hoping that I would message him. So we can see, even though I would say that my partner used to be a really hardcore avoidant, we can see that the feelings are there, even when they don't express them, even when it looks like everything's hunky-dory and they're happy the relationship's ended. Actually, they're not. They do have feelings. They just don't express them in the way that other attachment styles do. So question 3, what made him come back after long periods? So we had, as I mentioned before, we'd had several long breakups ranging from sort of a couple of months to 6 months. We'd been through several of these breakups. They were almost always initiated by him and almost always during conflict. So there was never any cheating, there was never any big breach of trust. We were just in conflict, and neither of us had the skills to navigate conflict in a way that didn't end the relationship. So during these long breakups, just to give you a bit of an idea of what I was doing, the breakups that happened towards the beginning, I was purely doing techniques from Neville Goddard, for example, or other law of attraction techniques, where I would sit and I would meditate, I would imagine us together, I would imagine a text message, he would come back in, but I'd not done any work on myself, and the same patterns would continue over and over again. We were just stuck in these really painful patterns that almost always ended in us breaking up again, both of us feeling distraught, both of us being really in despair and not really knowing how to navigate the situation in any other way aside from splitting up. So the answer to that question, he said that he missed all aspects of the relationship. So he missed the closeness, he missed the companionship, he missed having somebody to support him. He needed that. Even though he'd never expressly said that, he did need that. As an avoidant, he'd previously prided himself on, I can handle life on my own. I don't need anything from you. And he genuinely believed that as a defense mechanism so that he didn't have to be vulnerable. But obviously what happens over time, when the relief of the relationships died off and when they're more in their feelings rather than their fears, then they start to sort of see a bit of clarity and start to think, well, actually, maybe this isn't the end, and maybe this is something that can be resolved. So after long periods, the idea of being in the relationship again was preferable. And what I was doing at those times, and particularly when I think about our longest breakup, which would have been about 6 months, that was around this time where I had a real spiritual experience. And I would say it was Dark Night of the Soul, where I felt all of my trauma, all of my fear coming up. And I was processing a lot of old emotions and really feeling into trauma that I had ignored, trauma that I had tried to suppress. And during that 6-month period, it all came back to the surface again. And I really had to go through and process quite a lot, which is why I think it did take longer than it normally would, because I'd gone through this whole purification process where at the end of it, I had a completely different perspective on the relationship, on myself. I'd changed the relationship to myself somewhat, and also had a completely different perspective on what manifesting was. So it was no longer about the techniques that I did. It was more about who I was being as a person and what was being reflected back to me. So I had to really find my feet again. I'd felt quite ungrounded for several months, and I had to try and ground myself again into reality. And also this was during lockdown as well. This was during a COVID lockdown. So I pretty much had myself as company. So it was, really in hindsight, the perfect time for this to happen, because I wasn't thinking he's going to go off with somebody else, because that wasn't available to him. We were all in lockdown anyway. So I had the reassurance that he wasn't going to meet anyone else. There wasn't any urgency anymore. But he felt like that as well, and he really delved into his self and his creature comforts because he was on his own. So he had to sit with himself. And when we came back together and when I asked him about that specific period of time, we were both thinking about making the relationship better. We were both thinking that we don't want to get into the old patterns anymore. How can we fix things? How can we behave differently? And ultimately, we did come back together again. And that was initiated by him. And, you know, I know what he's saying is true because that's exactly what he told me at the time, that he missed the dynamics of our relationship. Because in hindsight, you know, 90% of the time, we were good. It wasn't that the whole relationship was chaotic. It's just that when things were bad, they were so bad that neither of us could really process properly what was going on because we were both in fear, we were both feeling hurt, and we were both triggering our own attachment styles, where I would feel anxiously attached and then swing to avoidance, and he would be in his avoidant attachment. But we both still came back together. And that was a really pivotal moment because I felt, and he did as well, that the relationship dynamics had definitely changed. We were nowhere near perfect, but they had definitely changed. So, question 4, what stopped him from moving on with someone else? And his answer to this was, I did try with someone else, but I would struggle with other people. Did date other people, I felt the pull was too great towards me. So I remember I think it was 2019, the end of 2019, where he had started dating somebody else. And I actually recall when he came back in, which was around the middle of December time, and I knew that he'd been dating somebody else, but it was more of an intuition rather than factual. So when he did come back in, the fact that he'd said that he'd dated somebody else didn't really trigger me that much because I already kind of knew that. But what I had instilled in myself was that he would end that relationship for me. And that relationship, by the way, was incredibly short-lived. It was about a month, if that. And he actually disclosed that he was using that relationship to try and get over me. And this is another thing that I was thinking as well, that he's just doing this to try and get over me because he can't do it on his own. And it didn't surprise me when he said I would really struggle with other people, because I always had that knowing that he didn't want anyone else. I always had that knowing that he did want to be with me. It's just that we don't know how to get ourselves out of this destructive pattern. And as a typical DA, when they're in deactivation mode, they will tell themselves stories. If there's conflict, this person isn't a match for me, or the perfect person is out there for me, I just need to go and find them, until they realize that there is no perfect person, that everybody has their flaws. And this is what my partner gradually came to terms with, that there was no perfect relationship. There was no perfect person that was out there for him waiting to be found. I also asked him what he was feeling during these times as well. And like I said before, he would initially feel the relief, and then that would quickly turn into loneliness. It would quickly turn into longing and missing, because this is what the dismissive avoidance cycle is. They crave a relationship, they get into one, everything's fine, and then they start to nitpick. Then they start to think about being on their own again. And then they end the relationship abruptly, and then they're on their own again, but then they want somebody. And that was his responsibility to break this pattern. That wasn't anything to do with me. And I'd certainly got out of the idea that I could fix him. That was something in the beginning that I totally thought that I could do. I thought I could fix him. But really, it was an avoidance strategy of my own to not fix myself. And what I also noticed about that period of time as well is during that breakup, at the beginning of that breakup, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm better off with somebody else. Oh my God, it'd be so much easier with somebody else. And so it transpires that he was thinking exactly the same thing as I was thinking, that he just acted on it. And that was okay. Moving on to question 5. What made him change to show up for commitment? So what he said is he knew that he had to step up or the relationship would never have gone anywhere. When I've had discussions with him about this, just to put it into perspective, this was during our final breakup, which was around March time 2022. And this breakup was different because I had had enough. I wanted to move on. I wanted to pour everything into myself and to be secure in myself, to actually show up for myself so that I wasn't outsourcing onto him all the time, because in hindsight, that's exactly what I was doing. I was still, for all those years, coming from a place of lack. I was trying to control my environment so that I felt loved, so that I felt wanted, instead of actually giving those things to myself. So during that breakup, I mean, it only lasted about 6-7 weeks. During that breakup, I really did pour all of my efforts into healing myself, into being more secure, to being more confident. And I didn't pay attention to him at all. Now, this breakup was super different for him as well, because he said for the first day he was okay, but after that he wasn't. After that day, he felt really, really anxious and afraid that this time it was over. And that's another example of me thinking that this is over now, and him thinking exactly the same thing. However, him having the opposite reaction of fear and me feeling quite empowered about that. So I sort of walked around doing this for a number of weeks. And I remember that he sent me a text message on my birthday in the May, and we had a conversation that didn't go anywhere. And I also remember the day that he messaged me again, which would have been around June time, where I can specifically remember that day feeling so unworthy. And I think I'd spent about 12 hours crying profusely, being a right mess. And then a message came through again saying that he wanted to meet up and talk. But this time I wasn't afraid to assert my boundaries. And this is a really, really interesting event, because I had never set boundaries in this relationship. I didn't even know that I could have boundaries. I thought boundaries meant that he was going to run away. But I had decided at that point that, number one, I wanted a partner that lived with me. And number two, that I didn't want any more children. Now, just to put that in perspective, I already have a 9-year-old, and my partner doesn't have children. He is 5 years older than me as well. So I'm 39 now, he's 44. So I had to step up to assert these boundaries, because that was what was authentic to me. And at that point, if he'd have said, no chance of me living with you, and yes, I want children, I would have been absolutely prepared to walk away from this relationship. But that isn't obviously what happened. And when I asked him this question, and when he says that it wouldn't have gone anywhere, he is right, it wouldn't have been. And it isn't that I was coming at the situation sort of from an ultimatum where move in with me or else. I was completely prepared for him to go and find somebody else, because I knew that not living with somebody and being in this situation where we saw each other once in the week and at weekends was not fulfilling to me anymore. I knew that I deserved better. I knew that I deserved the sort of commitment that I wanted. And I opened my mind to the idea that it might not be him. And with the issue around children, I honestly thought this is going to be the final nail in the coffin. I honestly thought he was going to say, no, I really want one. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye. But he didn't. It wasn't something that he was totally sold on anyway, that he wasn't really that bothered about having one. And we continued. And so that was sort of the June time. And, within a really short space of time, we'd actually, got really close again. But I did have to put boundaries in. And this was the catalyst for his healing. This was the catalyst for him to start to self-inquire, for him to start to notice his own patterns and break them, so that we could move forward in a more secure way. And by the October, he had had his house up for sale, and by the May, we were living together. Which leads me on to question 6, which was there anything specific to make this happen? So When I asked him this, what he said was, it just felt right at the time. There wasn't any sort of intellectual thinking process. He said it just felt right at the time. I spotted my chance and thought, let's go for it. And the more and more he started to show up, that he was at least moving the needle. I wasn't expecting him to be perfect, but what I did need to see was some sort of improvement, and vice versa. He needed to see my improvement as well. And for both of us at that point, it just felt right. It felt right. There wasn't any resistance to it anymore. Even if fear momentarily came up, I could easily handle that. I could easily reassure myself that everything was going to be okay, and the same for him as well. So question 7. In general, what was he thinking and doing? So he said, checking WhatsApp. As I said to you before, he would check to see if I was online on WhatsApp. Neither of us actually do social media, so it isn't like we could stalk each other. So the only thing we really had was WhatsApp. He was wondering whether I was going to meet somebody else, which I thought was super interesting, because I was so afraid at the beginning of him running off and meeting somebody else. And that did manifest twice. So it did manifest in him having a one-night stand years and years ago, and then again when he started dating this other person. It's interesting to me that he was worried about the same thing I was. He was worried about it being over this time. Every time we broke up, he was really, really worried that this is the end. This is, I'm never going to see her again. And what he said happens is that he would then go into his creature comforts to try and suppress, to try and cope. But the feelings would always come back around again, where he said he'd be okay for a couple of days and then the feelings would come up, which is pretty much the same pattern I had. I would be okay for a couple of days. I would do my affirmations, I would meditate, I would do my tapping, and then I would fall to shit again in a couple of days, because I wasn't processing my emotions properly, and he wasn't processing his either. So question 8. What was his perspective on the on and off aspect of our relationship? So his answer was really interesting, because my experience of the on and off was that it was really triggering, and it was really, really scary to me, because I thought that I was going to lose him, that I would be abandoned. So it would cause me to feel a massive amount of distress. Whereas when I asked him about it, he said that breaking up was a relief, but then getting back together was a relief. So when I would feel really anxious about us, splitting up, and, I'd have all these fears of being abandoned again, that he's going to meet somebody else, we can see that it's the polar opposite. So I was sort of this side of the spectrum in despair, and he was this side feeling, oh my God, thank God that's over. I can relax now. I've got my freedom back now. But then as my anxiety dropped, and I started to feel okay, his anxiety heightened, where he was worried that I would meet somebody else. He was worried that the relationship was over. He was worried that that was the last time he was going to see me. So when I was feeling okay, his anxiety heightened, which prompted him to get back in touch with me. But he said that deep down, he always had a sense that we would get back together. And I suppose I'd always had that knowing. Even underneath all of the anxiety, I still had that little tiny voice that said that everything was going to be fine. And I can actually remember quite a spiritual experience where I felt completely broken, completely distraught, in despair. And I can remember crying so hard and I was literally begging for peace. I was saying, please just take this feeling away. And a voice came from somewhere that said to me that everything is fine. He is still there. And I held on to that. So even when I've been in really, really dark times, I've still held on to, he's always there. This is just temporary. This is just so that we can regroup, so that we can look at the mistakes, so that we can heal, and so that we can move forward as a secure couple, which ultimately is what we've both always wanted. We've just wanted to be a secure couple that grows together. Really hope you found those questions helpful, and I really hope it's given you some sort of relief. So when it is that you're thinking, I'm doing all this work and none of it's working, and no judgment, I've been there, know that even when you can't see it, something is still happening. If you have any questions about this video, please pop them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. But I will see you in the next video.